Hello and welcome to a one-take toilet top audiobook production. This series book, Quantum Gate by Jane E. Hawkins. The back. Troublemakers, renegades, deviants. Phoenix Company is the perfect troop to send through the Quantum Gate, a time-space technology so experimental the engineers themselves aren't sure how it works. The year is 2057 and fires rage across the Earth's polluted landscape. Environmental Armageddon threatens to collapse the entire biosphere unless a top-secret UN plan, Project Eden, succeeds. At first, Phoenix Company's mission seems simple: protect the base from swarms of huge alien bugs. But when two soldiers are euthanized during a routine battle, Private Andrew Griffin realizes nothing is as it seems. What is their real mission? Who are they really killing? And how long does he have before he meets his own merciful death? The blurb. She continued to approach him. I am obligated to inform you that your contact is currently being interpreted under the Indentured Forces Act. The gun was now touching the man's chest. As he looked down at it, his face changed, and he raised his hands. Griffin felt a wash of relief. Michaels knew she meant it. Failure to cure this breach, she said, and raised her gun to his neck, could result in substantial penalties. She pushed the gun's muzzle into the soft underside of Michael's chin. For a long, still moment, Griffin was afraid she might blow Michael's head off right in front of them. Please, no. Please don't do it. Griffin was afraid to breathe. Michaels blinked. Cranshaw didn't. She waited. And now, Quantum Gate, a novel, by Jane E. Hawkins, based on the smash hit computer game for Windows 3.1, Hyperbole's Quantum Gate. Forward. Stories are funny things. Like lovers, they possess you. Some go away, some you stay with for the rest of your life. Quantum Gate seems to fall into this latter category. It has consumed the past 4 years of my life, and now, as evidenced by the book you hold, it refuses to depart. Fortunately, given the current incarnation, this is a good thing. Good because Jane has done a superlative job of bringing the story of Quantum Gate into the world of paper and ink, and good because I am allowed to see it fresh. Quantum Gate actually began life during the Gulf War. One night, while watching a murky CNN broadcast of an Iraqi missile attack, it occurred to me how easily the event could have been faked. Indeed, they could have told us that a nuclear weapon had been used against Baghdad, and if supported with the appropriate movie magic, we would have believed it. How would we have known otherwise? This seed, after a bit of embroidery and speculation, took root in the year 2057. The first incarnation appeared under the title No One Dreams Here in Hyperbole, the one-line interactive entertainment magazine which I published for several years. Built-in Micromind Director for the Macintosh, at that point it would seem to have little in common with the live-action, high-production interactive movie it would shortly become. Next came a company called MediaVision, a huge misnomer as we would eventually discover, and the chance to fully develop No One Dreams Here for CD-ROM using 3D sets as opposed to the hand-drawn backdrops of the earlier versions, and live actors as opposed to clip art and scanned images. We said yes. There were, however, a few caveats. They needed the whole thing in 6 months. A ridiculous schedule, as anyone in the world of software development can attest. And we had to move to Seattle from Houston, a great opportunity, as any Seattle resident can testify. Back then, yeah. Oh, and we had to change the name No One Dreams Here was too long. Quantum Gate, the marketing folks decided, had a stronger appeal to all those teenage boys who were destined to become our customers. In order to accommodate the ship it for Christmas or die schedule which faced us, we were forced to cut the story in half and greatly reduce the number and depth of the interactive elements. This bothered us considerably more than it bothered the publisher. Toward the end of our 6 months in the MediaVision gulag, we all realized that daily trips to our homes and contact with our families were seriously interfering with our productivity. So we set up tents and sleeping bags inside our development studio. I am not making this up. We'd work until too exhausted to go on, then crawl to a pile of bedding, sleep for a few hours, and get up and keep going. Eventually, perseverance, hard work, and endless compromises all paid off, and Quantum Gate was ready to be permanently etched into all those shiny discs. It won many awards, was lauded by some, and lambasted by others. As one of the first interactive movies for the personal computer, it was born with something of an identity problem. We never set out to make a computer game. Personally, I don't enjoy computer games. We intended to create a story which the player can participate in and experience in a new way. In that, we succeeded. We didn't do quite so well at setting people's expectations properly. MediaVision's marketing machine made Quantum Gate sound like a frenetic sci-fi blast fest. It was, by design, anything but that. Once Quantum Gate shipped, we almost immediately began work on the Vortex, the so-called second half of No One Dreams Here. I could tell you about MediaVision's compulsory script changes, meaning more sex and guns, their bankruptcy, turns out they were all a bunch of crooks, or our mad scramble to stay afloat after they walked out on the hundreds of thousands of dollars they owed us to finish the project. Yeesh. It would sound all too commonplace to anyone really familiar with the world of entertainment or media. Suffice it to say that we survived and managed, somehow, to complete the Vortex for a 3-disc CD-ROM and publish it ourselves. It, too, won many awards and kudos. It, too, was lambasted by people who couldn't conceive of anything other than a game. All of which simply brings me up to the present and why it is that Jane's version of Quantum Gate is so precious to me. In many ways it represents the real story. It is No One Dreams Here, before years of compromise and short-sightedness, before being bullied, conned, and threatened by unscrupulous hucksters looking to cash in on our work. It is a joy to be able to return to those ideas and characters which first presented themselves to me 4 years ago. It is a joy to find them rendered here with such heart and skill. It is a joy which, most of all, I am happy that we can share. Signed, Greg Roach. Chapter 1. Something was critically wrong, and Private Andrew Griffin had no idea what it was. Beside him, the other members of his platoon stood at attention, each waiting to take the solitary walk into the heart of the Quantum Gate, and into whatever unknown waited on the other side. Griffin surreptitiously wiped his palms along the seams of his trousers as Private Michaels swaggered into the center of the huge chamber. Castle had already vanished into the flashing lights and hollow roar. Now Michaels stood at attention, looking impudent and hip, and light gleamed from his shaven skull. Griffin stared at him, and Michaels winked back. Cocky bastard. Perhaps he hadn't heard. A beam of pure red light shot up around him. 12 bronze crystals rose like the immense petals of a closing flower, hiding Michaels from sight, and the roar reached a crescendo. Griffin winced, and it came again, the same way it had with Castle. Over the roar, over the rush, a thin, high noise, almost beyond hearing, a thin, high noise like a man's scream. Something was desperately wrong. Then all the noise disappeared, and Griffin stared into a moment of pure and shocking silence before the great gold crystals petaled open and reveal an empty center. Griffin's shoulders tensed. If he could, he would have turned and ran. But the crack troops of Beatrice's 23rd Armored Division, Phoenix Company, were supposed to be conditioned to bravery, no matter how they felt inside. Never mind that they had the worst record at Fort Chicago for troublemaking, rule-breaking, and general hell-raising. They still had a reputation for courage to maintain. Hence Michael's confident strut into the heart of the Quantum Gate. Hence Griffin's mildly startled reaction when the calm voice of an artificial person called his name. "Prepare for gate opening," it said evenly. A sexless voice. Griffin noted irreverently and knew that he was grasping at anything to keep him from thinking about the gate and that high, thin scream. He marched straight and stiff into the center of the gate and stood within the glowing circle, looking back at the faces of the remaining patrol. He wondered if he had looked as nervous as they did now. The trip from Fort Chicago the night before had been typical military hurry up and wait. The same since the beginning of time, he suspected, whether you were soldiering for God, for country, or in this year 2057 for Beatrice International's Military Division, 23rd Armored, owned and operated, trained and staffed by a department of a division of an agency of a branch of one of the world's largest multinational corporations. For the past few years, the 23rd Armored had contracted out to the United Nations. The platoon had hurried to pack their 5 kilomass allotment and waited 2 hours for the transport to show up. They hurried to take their places on board and waited during the long trip from Fort Chicago. The paint over the window beside Griffin had cracked and peeled, and he had perversely stared out at the damaged landscape. Even the laboring, polluted sky looked dirty, and it was impossible to believe that the corrupted soil had ever supported life. No wonder so few windows looked out at the violated land. Newer buildings like this hangar had no windows at all. "What?" Michaels had demanded as they came off the transport, gesturing at the huge, featureless hangar. The artificial person at the door looked at him with luminous eyes. "You will be transported via Quantum Gate." The AP, who either could not or would not clarify things, said with mindless friendliness. Quantum Gate? What was that? What did it do? Where would it take them? Griffin listened patiently, while Michaels and Alonzo, troublemakers both, peppered the AP with questions and received no answers at all. But the platoon had speculated the night before and thought they knew. The stringent mass allowance in Sergeant Cranshaw's keyed-up excitement seemed to confirm it. Fort Chicago had a spaceport. Copernicus Station was in the window, and the UN had been upping staff on the orbital since Global Emergency Order 3109 last month. So, they were being sent space-side. What else could it be? When Michaels asked as much, the AP responded with a friendly smile and shooed them all aside. But they were all wrong. They had to be. And now Castle and Tish and Michaels had gone to some unknown place, transported in some unknown way, and Griffin looked at his fellow soldiers and felt sick. Sergeant Cranshaw stared back with her wide, dark eyes. He felt a touch of dizziness and tightened his shoulders even more. He hadn't slept well for the last few nights. None of them had. The huge gold petals spread out around him seemed to quiver slightly. His pulse beat in his throat. The platoon had been told not to eat for 12 hours before this trip, and now he knew why. Around him, the air began to glow. It was starting. "I hope this isn't going to hurt," he thought. As if in mocking answer, the roar suddenly increased, his vision went white, and pain screamed through his body. A rising column of white bubbles of light pulling him nowhere and everywhere, growing larger and brighter, He was stretched toward every glowing orb and rose through them, torn apart slowly like a sectioned orange, and nothing existed, nothing existed, nothing existed, except the pain. He screamed, but could not hear himself. He fell upward into nothing. He was dying. He was living 5 lives. He heard voices, saw flashes of images, and thought the thoughts of other people. And over it, and under it, and through it was stunning, blinding, bright-edged agony. And then the pain was gone, like a switch clicking off. He had a body, he had a reality. A blurred symbol occupied the center of his vision. He couldn't make his eyes tell him what it was. He didn't care. He was drunkenly delighted to be free of the pain and back in a place that had a recognizable where and when. An AP's voice said, "All new arrivals, please report to the briefing room in 10 minutes. Terrific. Orders before I can see. Where's the briefing room? Where am I? But the questions weren't that urgent, and he smiled, happy to be inside normal military confusion. His vision flickered, then cleared. He was looking at a door. This must be my room. Well, that's a start. He smiled again, tried to move, and passed out. Chapter 2. Griffin opened his eyes to see a fan set into an oddly angled ceiling. His fingers twitched against the familiar roughness of a military-issue blanket. Lying in a bunk? Yes, in his billet, in whatever place the quantum gate had sent him to. Some gate, he thought fuzzily. Then he remembered the cool voice of the artificial person and the briefing in 10 minutes. 10 minutes from when? He blinked. Not to worry, the AP would let him know. They were famous for being nosy and intrusive like that. He sat up too fast so that his head spun and his vision blurred. He held onto the bunk for a moment, waiting for the dizziness to subside, before carefully swinging his legs out of the bunk. His body felt like it had been taken apart and not put back together quite right. Nothing hurt, but the giddiness bothered him. He closed his eyes again and clenched his right hand, driving short nails into the skin of his palm. The pain cleared his head somewhat. He looked around carefully to move his head slowly. The room was a standard UN enlisted billet. A small table with a chair stood in the center of the room, and a Militerm informational terminal glowed from the wall facing him. If he was space-side, it certainly looked no different from any UN billet he had seen since enlisting. He grimaced. After all, what did he expect? Little bug-eyed monsters for roommates? He continued his careful survey of the room, and to his right saw a shelf piled with the books he'd crammed into his mass allowance. He raised an eyebrow. This was definitely strange. Since when did privates rate transportation directly into their own rooms? And unpacking services, he sat still for a moment, looking at the 3 slim books and frowning. No, he had unpacked them himself. He could remember doing it. Gaia, the gate had a kick like a mule. Was he actually conscious now? He stood carefully and moved through a short series of wake-up exercises. He kept missing his reach, as though his hands didn't know where the rest of his body was. That feeling dimmed as he ran through the sequence, but still bothered him as he walked over the terminal and tapped on the screen. The message light was on, but he ignored it. That pretty much had to be Mom. He selected base maps. The AP had said the briefing was in 10 minutes. He could only hope he hadn't been out for long, or he'd be AWOL from his first orders on the new assignment. The terminal showed him a path from where he was to the briefing room, a couple of halls and 1 floor away. Then he asked for a short scan of the entire base, and his breath caught. There were 3 octagonal floors, each set in 5 centers connected by hallways to an inner atrium with elevators. In Blueprint, the floors looked like a snowflake. The first floor contained basic operations, the quantum gate, security, briefing simulation, the hangar, and the main entry. A glowing dot showed that he was currently on the second floor, in the enlisted quarters, between a civilian lab and sick bay. The mess hall and a lounge for enlisted personnel were also on this floor. The third floor contained higher-level operations, UN quarters, officers' mess, the commanding officers' quarters, central processing, and UN SciTech quarters. Griffin let his fingers rest on the terminal screen, staring blankly ahead. The base layout was distinctive and unmistakable, a Class N, hardened base, probably part of a cluster or would be soon if it wasn't yet. If the armor was installed, this thing could stand up to a fusion beam. The UN hadn't spent that much money on the new base in Rangoon, where the guerrillas were nearly as well armed as the companies. Where was he that they were blowing this kind of money? His request for a local map got nothing, so he gestured through the whole series of Militerm menus and still couldn't find a map. He folded his arms and stared at the terminal's sketchy menu. Weird. Militerm was always a laugh riot as a data source, but usually there was something about the surrounding area. Why would they have omitted that? Maybe they just forgot? Or put a map and the map crashed? They had to be at Copernicus Station. They sure as hell weren't at Moon Base. The gravity was all wrong for that. And in the presumed reaches of the universe, it was the only other place humans could go. And not only was Copernicus a man-made station and mapped to within a micron, but it was an exclusively UN base. You only got there if the UN meant for you to get there, and once you were there, aside from classified laboratories, every place was accessible, or so the gossip had it. Speyside meant Copernicus Station, didn't it? An AP appeared in front of him. General orientation will begin in 5 minutes. All new personnel to the first floor briefing room in 5 minutes. Okay, he muttered as it vanished. It wouldn't hear him anyway. He tapped his way back to the main screen and stared at it while his right hand spread over his stomach and he kneaded the muscles as if he could somehow reach inside himself and get rid of that cold lump of wrongness in his belly. That message light stared back at him. By habit, he tapped the screen, and it listed the calls. Only one, and sure enough, from his mother. It wouldn't take more than a minute to listen to it, and if nothing else, it might distract him, move his mind away from the endless reel of questions, and his body away from that frozen sense of danger. He hesitated a moment longer. According to the map, the briefing room was very close. He tapped the screen again. The Militerm screen read, Barbara Griffin, 11:25:57, 170 seconds. Run it, said Griffin, and pulled the chair to face the terminal. She held out a remote as the picture flared into view on the wall. Her soft face was determined and her hair was carefully arranged. She wore a suit, had a flower in her lapel, and all the pictures on the wall behind her were straight. Griffin shook his head at the screen and felt a stab of unwanted sympathy for her. She had dressed up to make the vid letter. She tried so hard. She always had. Suddenly, he forgot the cold spot in his stomach and leaned forward, intent on the image of his mother and the years of history and habit and responses that made up their relationship. Yeah, Mom always tried so damn hard. Hi, Drew. Sweetie, it's me. I hope you're well. It's so funny to be talking to you like this. I hope you know what you're doing. Griffin grunted, glad she couldn't see or hear him. Since when did his mother ever think he knew what he was doing? Jenny had said. Griffin shook his head. Don't think of that, Jenny. We're all well here. Betsy and Jojo say hi. They have a friend who's at Fort Bragg. It is funny to be talking like this. Where's he stationed? Stuff like that. I never thought I'd end up a military mom. She looked down. He couldn't see her lap, but he knew she was wringing her hands, the way she always did when she was upset. She looked up, and the careful smile had dropped, leaving confusion and anger naked on her face. "Oh, damn it, Drew! I can't believe you just ran off and joined the goddamn army!" The outburst surprised a laugh out of him. He hadn't expected her to be that honest. That's part of why he'd refused direct contact for so long. He just couldn't stand the thought of watching her try to pretend she wasn't upset about his enlistment. She was embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I swore that I wouldn't swear. It's your life, and I just love you, son, and I hope that you're all right." "I love you too, Mom," said Griffin into the empty room, his voice choked. "But I sure wish you wouldn't give up on me." "I have a rally tomorrow. It's going well. I think it is, anyways. It's so hard to tell what's really going on these days. You know these men at the UN and the Congress. They'll tell you anything to your face and turn right around and, oh, I don't know. It doesn't matter." Doesn't matter? Griffin felt chilled. She had always insisted that even the smallest green action mattered. Pick up a plastic bag off the sidewalk and get it into the recycling program instead of into a landfill. Everything mattered. The only person he'd met who even came close to her dedication was Private Tish, the heavy-set green fanatic in the platoon. Tish believed that only the UN, as a planetary organization, had a chance of staving off catastrophe. Barbara Griffin wasn't quite that fanatical, and nowhere near as convinced of either the UN's power or its benevolence. But like Tish, Barbara Griffin persisted. That was her most fundamental characteristic. His father had said, "People look at Barbara's baby face and they think that they can squash her, but she just keeps coming back, doesn't she?" Dad hadn't much cared for Mom's causes, yet he had a grudging respect for his wife's determination. Even as the planet poisoned around them, as the problem got bigger and more out of control, Barbara Griffin persisted in insisting that each tiny gesture made a difference, each little motion counted. Her stubborn bravery made her son want to cry, or strangle her, or both. But this wasn't the first time she'd said such a thing, was it? The last year or so, she had continued her activism as vigorously as ever, but she had begun making the sad remarks about whether any of it could really make a difference. He'd noticed, but hadn't really thought about it. He had been too busy fighting with Jenny and not quite failing medical school. "Anyway, look, how is it there? I'm dying to know what army life is like. The other night, your Aunt Jane and I downloaded this new Patrick Stallone movie where he's in the army. We couldn't figure out the interface. It had all these switches and stuff. Anyway, it was all so rough. Do they really fight like that in the army? I hope you're not fighting like in that movie. All they did was fight." "Oh, for crying out loud, Mom," said Griffin. "Oh, fiddle. I'm out of time. All right, real quick." Barbara Griffin took a deep breath and looked into her recorder. "I saw Jenny yesterday. She's doing good. She sends her love, and she says that she'll be calling you soon. I thought maybe I should warn you. Anyway, son, I love..." The screen went blank. Griffin felt hair rise on his arms. Jenny might send him a message? Lovely, laughing, broken Jenny? Oh, Gaia, please, no. She was the reason he had joined the army, far older than the other new recruits. She was the reason he had run away one more time, the last in what seemed to him to be a long, long series of departures. Pretty, pretty Jenny, who would never be pretty Jenny again. He slapped the terminal off and flung himself toward the door, running away again, and he knew it. Chapter 3. The door of his room smoothly rised open as he approached, revealing a small entryway bordered by several doors like his own. The floor was undecorated spectra stone, the structural cross-hatching clearly visible. He scanned the names on the nearest doors. Michaels, Whalen, Alvarez. Looked like the rest of the platoon was billeted here. Good. None of the other doors were open, and he decided not to bother querying them. He didn't feel much like talking to anyone right now, especially Michaels, Who would have some cockeyed paranoid theories about the gate and wherever they were now and anything else that had caught the man's fancy? Increasingly, Griffin didn't entirely discount Michael's theories. It was just that he preferred, on the whole, to try to puzzle things out on his own. His footsteps echoed as he walked across the dark floor. The exit opened ahead of him, and he entered a long, curving corridor with the lift entrance in front of him. Jenny wouldn't like this place. She would say it hadn't been made for humans. Well, she would be right. Most military bases weren't. Jenny. Maybe it was the gate and whatever it had done to him, but he had lost the ability to think about something else when her name crossed his mind. Jenny. The word rang in his brain, and he shook his head, then had to stop for a moment as his queasy body threatened to rebel. After a moment, things quieted down, and he forced himself forward through a gold and gray hall that led to another door and into the lift. The door closed behind him, and he stopped, startled by bright green foliage and flowers after the darkness of the halls. He was in a glass tube clinging to the circular wall of a 3-story atrium. Clear light shone from a faceted source near the top. A spiral of lights wound through the center from top to bottom. The density and richness of the greenery was impressive. He took a minute longer just looking. Sealed cities were more and more common on Earth, and each sealed city had its hydroponic gardens that generated not only food but the very air citizens breathed. But this didn't look like the usual cabbages and peas at Civic Garden. This looked free and wild and bright, like something out of a story vid, a history show or a fantasy. It looked so natural that he thought it might even rain in there sometimes. Clear, bright, fresh rain. How much water did it take to maintain that? He pressed the button for the first floor and watched the atrium change as the lift lowered him. At the bottom, a replica of the Venus de Milo stood in the center of the greenery, womanly curves glowing in the light. He suddenly remembered Jenny's tapestry, green and naked and glowing. Angrily, he pushed the thought away. Jenny was the past, as much past as free-running water and green trees, just a fantasy. He strode down the hall and through a door labeled briefing/simulation, wishing he could find an old-fashioned hinged door so that he could slam it. The briefing room was surprisingly small, capable of holding maybe 50 people at most. Fewer than 20 milled around amid a low murmur of voices. An unknown red leaf symbol decorated the far wall. To his right hung a huge poster, emblazoned with the words "Eden on Earth." He wondered vaguely what that was about as he sat down. The wall facing him was a 3D view screen, now whited out. The platoon's voices seemed muted, as though everyone was feeling a bit strange. He cradled his forehead in his hands and looked at his mates from under the tent of his palms. Sergeant Cranshaw stood on the far side of the room, talking with a tall man in a UN lieutenant's uniform. Did that mean they'd be working closely with UN? Great. The lieutenant looked even more Ironside than most. Michaels lounged in his seat, looking around the briefing room as though waiting for a reason to object. He'd find one soon enough. He always did. Nearby, Hawkins sat neatly, hands steepled together, probably giving thanks for his safe arrival. Griffin thought without sarcasm. Scuttlebutt had it that Hawkins had once been a minister until discovered to be helping himself to the offerings plate. Nobody had asked Hawkins about it, though the man had an air of deep and quiet dignity, and even in the short time Griffin had known him, Hawkins had functioned as the platoon's counselor and confessor. Hot Pants Hynek occupied a seat near the door. Youngest in the platoon, he was also hands down the single horniest human being Griffin had ever known. The platoon was of the collective belief that Hynek, given the appropriate encouragement, would hump anything that moved, and a few things that didn't. So far, the lanky country boy had done nothing to change this opinion. Private Castle's empty hands moved through the air, shuffling an invisible deck. She'd been transferred out of previous platoons for gambling, or more particularly for winning. In fact, there wasn't a member of Phoenix Company who hadn't served time elsewhere and been booted out, except for Andrew Griffin himself, the new kid on the block. He would have been tempted to tell himself that he'd been slotted into the platoon only to make up the numbers, but deep inside he knew better. He'd spent most of his life running away from one thing or another. Joining Beatrice was simply the last in a long line of getaway attempts. His head swirled again, sick and dizzy, and he gripped the edges of the table in front of him. This feeling of sickness had to be because of the gate, he thought, and the tension and the lack of good sleep. Either that, or he was finally losing his mind. He leaned back and closed his eyes, and memory assaulted him. Mother was turning toward him as she walked into her living room. She looked worried and old. "Drew, there's been an accident." Her face dissolved into Jenny's tapestry. Jenny had spent nearly a month's wages on the reproduction and installed it on the wall above her bed. What was its name? Bright colors, naked people dancing in a circle, a deer wandering by, sound of rushing water. Shining in bright light, Jenny pranced through the orchard. The unruly mane of her soft, curly hair drew his eyes and his hands. He'd been reluctant to take the trip, worried about the time off from studying and daunted by the greenhouse's visiting fees. Now he was in a daze of love and joy as he watched her delight in the growing plants. She plucked a ripe peach, bit into it, and then smiled as though she had invented the glorious taste right there. She was so beautiful. Looking into her eyes was almost unbearable. Looking away was worse. He reached for her, folded her soft, warm body against his, felt her arms encircle his waist. Deep inside him, a silent voice was saying, "Jenny, angel, perfect angel, don't leave me. Please don't ever leave me. I can't be without you." He loved her so intensely it frightened him. He didn't know what to do with the feeling, what it meant, how he could live with it. He kissed her, the peach taste still strong in her mouth, and he tasted peach from her lips, murmuring, "Marry me, Jenny, marry me. Marry me, I'll never leave. I love you so much, I'll never leave you. Marry me, Jenny, I love you." And Jenny said, "Yes, yes, I will," and she reached out for him again. He heard sirens wailing. The rising sound overlaid her beloved face. He tried to hold on to her. She was slipping away. She looked at him sadly. "No, don't go. Stay with me. Never." "Griffin!" Griffin's eyes popped open. A sharp-faced man with a tidy black beard was glaring at him. Dark eyes bored into him from under a widow's peak that was sharply pointed as a lance. Griffin blinked in confusion. What had he done to incur the wrath of this man? "Private Griffin, might I suggest you confine your sleeping activities to your off-duty hours?" The man wore a black jacket with gold braid and gold edging on the collar. A red collar crowned his snowy white shirt. A UN colonel. Oh, hell. Must be his new CO, Saunders. Great first impression he just made. Yes, sir. Sorry, sir." He sat up straight. Michaels cracked up. Hawkins was doing a better job of hiding it, but his shoulders were shaking, and Sergeant Cranshaw's glare was as cold as the colonel's. Griffin felt his face redden as he looked back at Saunders. He had never fallen asleep like that before, never had daydreams of such overwhelming intensity. What was happening to him? The colonel's rock-hard eyes held him a moment longer, then released him and scanned the rest of the room. The laughter stopped abruptly. Griffin took a deep breath. Whatever it was, it would have to wait. Maybe he'd see the medic later. "Now then," said Saunders, "if we can proceed without further disturbance to Private Griffin." Another sharp glance sliced into him. "Might I point out that we are here under the auspices of United Nations Global Emergency Order 3109. Our mission here is of the highest priority and is top secret. The policy shack at the UN has instructed me to protect the status of this mission with extreme prejudice." He paused, then said, All aspects of this operation are governed by the International Indentured Forces Act, so we don't have to worry about a repeat of the... Saunders paused, smiled grimly, and his gaze swept the room again. Unpleasantness in Rangoon. Griffin's jaw slackened. Indentured. The only difference between military indenture and outright slavery was that the military usually paid you, and extreme prejudice simply meant that the UN had every right to slaughter you if they thought it suited their purposes, if they felt it fulfilled the mission. What had Beatrice International sold them into now? The unpleasantness in Rangoon had been a full-scale rebellion. The threat couldn't have been more plain if Saunders had pointed a weapon at them. He glanced down the room at the rest of the platoon, all of whom looked as grim as Griffin felt. The dizziness didn't go away, but the ice in his stomach grew. Saunders gestured toward two women on his left, introducing them as Dr. Elizabeth Marks and Dr. X.I. Lee, her assistant. Dr. Lee was a short, elegant-looking woman who appeared to be part Caucasian and part Asian. She was completely overshadowed by Dr. Marks, who, despite a very severe hairstyle, had a compellingly female presence. She looked to be in her late 40s, far older than the women who usually drew his gaze, and she seemed very tense. Dr. Marks moved like a woman who knew her own body. Jenny might have moved that way when she was older, but the accident changed that. No! Stop thinking about Jenny! Pay attention! Dr. Marks nodded at Saunders, and Griffin suddenly leaned forward, paying attention so deep it was almost painful, thirsty to learn anything and everything that would help him understand where he was and why he was here, and how he could possibly hope to get out with his skin intact. Chapter 4. I'm sure it will come as no surprise to anyone here that the Earth is on the verge of environmental Armageddon. Griffin blinked. Usually civilian types eased into talks, but Dr. Elizabeth Marks faced the platoon and rapped out the words as though they hurt her mouth. Private Michaels, ever the troublemaker, lounged back and said, "You been watching ICCN, huh, Doc?" He would get even for being indentured with extreme prejudice no matter what it took. Sarge cut in. "It'll be quite enough out of you, Michaels." Dr. Marks looked at Michaels as if he was a rather uninteresting wart. "Actually, soldier, ICCN's coverage leaves a bit to be desired. The situation is much worse than any of you have been led to believe." Much worse, thought Griffin. How could it be much worse? Kansas, Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana on fire? One of the world's greatest industrial powers besieged by unpleasantness, and a third of the world population suffering from chronic water deprivation syndrome? The doctor's face looked back at them. Suddenly, Griffin believed her. Not bad, not worse, but much worse. For an instant, Griffin didn't want to know. Didn't think he could handle knowing. Dr. Marks nodded grimly as though she could read his thoughts. The Environmental Emergency Management Office estimates that irreversible cellular death of the Earth's ecosphere will begin in less than 5 years. 5 years? That just couldn't be. His mother's green groups had access to an amazing array of computer equipment and technical knowledge. Papa Maynard alone was worth 10 normal AIs since it had decided on manumission. The worst it had forecast was Gaia death in 50 years, which was still pretty serious. Griffin couldn't understand how the UN might have data that the old AI couldn't ferret out, but how could it be an order of magnitude off? Dr. Marks turned to face the 3D screen behind her and called out. A moment later, the briefing room darkened and the round orb of a cartoonishly yellow sun glowed into life. Clouds swirled around it, and blue text scrolled in front of the holographic images. A female voice that seemed to form inside his head read out the words. "Clouds hid the sun, and the hand of man withered on its rod. The beasts of the field fell into pits and holes, and the smoke from all the world's burning made our eyes water." Ancient Sumerian text. Billowing dark clouds closed in around the sun like the shutting of a gate. The faint figure of a man looked at his malformed hand while a sheep bawled. The scene faded to black as the text shifted to red. Griffin frowned. What did this have to do with the UN mission? In rolling phrases over a background of shanty towns, rusting machinery, and old highways, the voice outlined the history of Earth's illness, the death by poison of rivers and forests and plains. EEMO's massive neural supercomputer, after 4.5 years of intensive computation on the World 5 simulation model, has projected 2062 as the year when the Earth's environmental decline can no longer be reversed. Griffin stared, and the artificial person solemnly told him that, by the year 2084, the irreversible process would be completed. And there it was, bleak and hard and naked for all the world to see, the death of the planet they called home, sooner even than the Greens' most hysterical predictions had forecast. I knew it, Tish muttered angrily behind him. I knew it was bad. I knew someone was lying. Can it? Sarge's voice said, quietly but with absolute firmness, and Tish subsided. The 3-vid image faded into a picture of Dr. Marks, and Griffin heard Michaels snort angrily. They'd actually had the gall to depict Marks with a halo behind her head. A new voice spoke. Enter Dr. Elizabeth Marks and Dr. V. Rampajani. While at Beatrice's Particle Accelerator Laboratory, Dr. Marks created a quantum gate, a device that was capable of reaching into the parallel reality frequencies surrounding our own. Dr. Marks's face was replaced by shifting images of an immense electrical generator and a machine that flashed and shimmered with light. However, the device's gargantuan energy requirements and the huge amounts of toxic waste it produced rendered it useless for any practical application. The head and shoulders of a dapper Asian man appeared on the screen. He did not have a halo. Dr. Rampajani, said the AP, is best known for his work with iridium dioxide, perfecting fusion in washing, a technique that produces huge amounts of oxygen, water, and ozone. Molecules danced through the air in front of him, looking as though he might be able to capture one in his hand. Iridium dioxide's extreme rarity rendered this promising technique nothing more than a laboratory novelty. The scene closed up, and Dr. Rampajani's hologram shrank until it had vanished. Another artificial person appeared, a Caucasian woman this time. One day, she said, and the date, November 25th, 2047, scrolled past in large numbers behind her head. Fate would intervene and bring these two world-class scientists directly into each other's path. While trolling quantum locations, Dr. Marks has discovered the planet AJ3905, a medium-sized Class A planet with huge reserves of iridium dioxide. The Eden Project was born. And the Eden Project, according to the words on the screen, was a United Nations Security Program classification A1, top secret. Griffin wasn't the only one who groaned. People got shot just for knowing there was such a thing as AI stuff. It didn't help to realize that this classification was why they had been indentured. He took a deep breath and argued with the fear. The UN wouldn't pay gargantuan energy costs and create masses of pollution, shipping to out a bunch of grunts just for the pleasure of killing them. Pay attention, do what you're told. The AP told them that all kinds of multinationals, both governmental and corporate, had an interest in the Eden Project, and it said that Eden's goal was to buy time, to give Earth's leaders a chance to find a solution before the planet's ultimate death. First, the AP said, would be the creation of an iridium dioxide mining outpost on planet AJ3905. The image of a yellow-green planet with large black areas appeared, and a white circle formed around a small section. The circled area expanded. The name Johnson's Archipelago appeared below it. Griffin looked at the largish island off the coast of a continent. Is that where they were? On an archipelago of a different planet? Amazing. And second, the construction of multiple high-capacity fusion scrubber sites around the globe. The map of Earth suddenly blossomed with red small dots. Iridium dioxide will be harvested on planet AJ3905, transported through the gate, and processed on Earth. The view changed to one of a camera looking up into a sunlit blue sky through leafy trees. The 3AP voice combined into a chorus. Let the sweet waters pour forth, nourishing beasts and men. Next to him, Griffin heard Michael's gag. Sweet and holy Gaia on a crutch, Griffin thought in amazement as the lights came up. We're in freaking outer space. Chapter 5. Dr. Marks stood silently at the front of the room for a moment, looking at them. No one spoke, no one even moved. She swallowed. As you can see, this couldn't be more important. Griffin stared at her. I guess not. Literally, the future of our race is at stake here. She looked up and then closed her eyes. When she opened them again, fear and pain shone from her face. We've really screwed this up. You know, at the end of the 20th century, most of the world's scientists signed an open letter to humanity saying we felt that without significant effort, the Earth's ability to sustain life would be severely jeopardized. She blinked rapidly and her voice shook. Saunders took a step toward her. The world's governments ignored our pleas, and now they are asking me to... Saunders stepped forward and raised his hand as though he was going to touch her shoulder. Griffin had the impression that he might have if other people hadn't been watching. Dr. Marks, he said sharply, let's stick to the subject at hand. Dr. Marks glanced at Saunders, started to speak, then shook her head. She strode off the platform, Dr. Lee, her assistant, following closely. After a moment, Saunders cleared his throat. Now on to some specifics. All the lead officers here are regular UN, as are the sci-techs and the technical contractors. The first group of coalition forces was from the EC 3rd Airborne Division. Our latest addition has been Beatrice's 23rd Armored Division, and I have received information that the next gate opening will bring us a division of MBM's Elite Guard. Griffin exchanged cynical glances with Michaels. The Elite Guard were rumored to be the biggest heavies in the entire military, a tough, seasoned, and ruthless group of fighters. The 3rd Airborne were no slouches either. So what was Phoenix Company, known fuck-ups, doing in company like that? So who says these guys are so hot? Michael whispered. Griffin tried to ignore him. So, as you can see, the entire international community is lending the UN its full support. Now then, does anybody have any questions? Wayland raised her hand, and Saunders nodded. Why is there such a large military force here for just a mining operation? The surface of AJ3905 is toxic, so the duty will not be without its hazards. Griffin raised his hand. So why is this mission top secret? The UN is very concerned about creating a global panic. Obviously, nothing is to be gained from that kind of chaos, but rest assured that all the appropriate national and corporate forces have been advised of the situation. Griffin did his best to keep his face blank. Global panic? Everyone knew the Earth was suffering. If you told them you were mining for a solution, what possible panic could there be? Just don't tell people about the terrible countdown, the closeness of planetary death. Then Griffin shook his head angrily. Am I supposed to think those people care about anything but their own profits and hides? Aren't they the ones who created this mess? And why would they tell us the truth? It just didn't make sense. Hawkins gestured for attention, and Saunders nodded. What's the time frame for completion here? The Eden Initiative will continue for at least several decades, and it might even prove viable as a long-term solution to the Earth's environmental situation. Michaels raised his hand. Saunders stared at him. Michaels said, with his face straight as a child's, What's for lunch? Griffin would have laughed if he hadn't thought Michaels was being stupid. Saunders did not look like someone to mess with. Saunders said, I believe it's bratwurst, Private Michaels. Michaels nodded and smiled happily, his ears sticking out like handles on either side of his naked skull. Saunders gestured to his left. Lieutenant Andrews, will you finish up here? And then walked out of the room. Griffin thought his next stop would be Dr. Marks. Man, Dr. Marks. Man, would he love to overhear that talk. Andrews was the dark man Griffin had seen talking with Crenshaw earlier. Must be her counterpart here. Lopez's waving hand caught the lieutenant's attention, and he frowned. Yes, Private, Lopez, is it? Yes, sir, Lopez said. Sir, why are we here? Andrews stared at him. I mean, we know about the gate now, and this planet, HA whatever it is, and all that, but why us grunts? Why does Eden Project need soldiers for? Sir? Lopez gestured with both arms as to include every soldier in the room. Why are we here? Andrews looked at Sergeant Crenshaw, who nodded her head sharply once and stepped forward to face her platoon. Fair enough, Lopez, she said evenly. We're soldiers. Our mission is to protect this station and the mining outpost. That's why we're here. Private Whalen raised her hand. Okay, she said. Protect them against what? We're on another planet. There shouldn't be any rebels here. Crenshaw favored her with a tight, lopsided smile. Whalen didn't smile back. Absolutely correct, Private, the sergeant said. There are hostile natives here. The bugs are about 3 meters tall and have a lot of arms and legs, and can jump like you wouldn't believe. You will learn all about them in about 30 minutes. In the meantime, fall out. Chapter 6. Oh man, Alvarez said with disgust. Bugs? I hate freaking bugs. The platoon had moved to the enlisted lounge on the second floor and now sat huddled around a large table, bent toward each other, bodies tense and faces stiff. She's gotta be joking, Whalen said. 3 meters? That's nuts, just plain nuts. I don't believe it. Yeah, well I do, Michael said, looking disgusted. And it's gotta be dangerous too. Something about it. Bugs or weapons on this planet. Something's deadly about this stuff. Tish raised his head. Not necessarily. You saw that video. This is a whole new planet. There's no way of telling what's out there. Us, we're trained to be alert, to be quick, to pay attention, to defend. Alonzo hooted. Us? Alert? Quick. Shit. Whatever you're on, man, I want some of it. Don't be an idiot, Tish retorted. Sure, we're not your usual company, and sure, we've got more than our share of people who got kicked out of other platoons. Nobody kicked me out, Alvarez said complacently. I left first. But if nothing else, we're trained, and when it comes to fighting, we're damn good. Tish glared at them, and one by one they nodded back. Whatever else Phoenix Company was, they were fine fighting people, and they knew it. Tish nodded tightly and continued. Hell, if I was on a new planet and didn't know what else was there with me, I'd want me along too. You and how many Marines? Lopez responded. Don't need any, Alonzo said. I just figured it out. We're not going to have to fight him. We're just going to turn Hot Pants Hynek loose on him. Castle laughed. After a moment, a few of the other soldiers joined in. Hynek, who thought it was a compliment, laughed the loudest. Okay, Hawkins said. Bottom line is we don't know enough yet, so we hang on for another, 20 minutes? Then the Sarge tells us all about it. He stood and stretched. And in the meantime, I'm going to find a cup of coffee. Anybody else coming along? Hynek stood up and followed him out, and the rest of the group broke up. Michael stayed put, staring glumly at the holographic fake sky covering the walls and ceiling and the unused skyball game that occupied the middle of the room. Griffin, at the far side of the table, watched him surreptitiously and wondered whether Michael's wild paranoias were as off the wall as they sounded. What had gotten into them, volunteering for a mystery assignment just because Crenshaw said it might be interesting? While the group was waiting for posting, the Sarge started talking about some of the strange information coming out of HQ. She didn't share much about what she had found out, but she said the UN was looking for a new group that could be flexible about their assignment. The higher-ups at Beatrice were also making extraordinary noises about the possibility for promotion and other advancement. She said it had the look of a good deal, and she put them in for it. She was good, Crenshaw. Good and smart and experienced, but she was also profoundly ambitious, something she hadn't bothered to hide. Sergeant Cranshaw looked to be Lieutenant Cranshaw someday soon, and General Cranshaw before she retired. And she was willing, she said, to take any of them along on the ride with her. Anyone except, perhaps, Michaels. Michaels was trouble. He'd been in and out of half a dozen different military outfits, always getting into shit for his big flapping mouth, always able to find a new gig because he was so good with the weapons. Well, Griffin was a good pilot, but he was no marksman, and he wasn't a big mouth. He just wanted a place where he could fit in and not have to make decisions anymore. And he decided suddenly not to have to listen to any more of Michael's theories. He pushed himself away from the table. The thought of coffee suddenly seemed very good. But halfway to the mess hall, he made a sharp turn and saw Dr. Marks almost running down the corridor. Saunders followed her. He stopped the woman with a hand on her shoulder. She spun around as though uncertain whether to hit him or hug him. "Beth, what's gotten into you?" The colonel frowned at her. His voice was both kind and impatient. Dr. Marks's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I don't know who I am anymore," she said miserably. Saunders took her by the shoulders and pulled her until she faced him. "We have a job to do, a very important job, a job that our futures depend on." He looked into her eyes, his face softer than Griffin would have thought possible. She didn't look convinced. "How can you know that what we're doing is right?" Saunders looked at her with exasperation, and something else, something Griffin couldn't quite define. "Beth," said Saunders, "we've been through this before. What do you want to do? Drag 12 billion people through—" Griffin must have moved inadvertently because Saunders saw him and stiffened. He released his grip on Dr. Marks. She looked at him for a second longer, then walked quickly away from the both of them. Saunders fixed Griffin with a frigid gaze and said, "Dismissed, soldier." Griffin stepped toward the mess hall door, and it rose open in front of him. "Yes, sir. Dismissed, sir. I am out of here." He wondered if Saunders was going to follow Marks, but he didn't dare turn around to see. The artificial person in the mess hall cheerily told him that the 24-hour special was bratwurst, which didn't sound at all interesting. Griffin poured himself a cup of coffee and took it to the table where Hynek and Hawkins were lounging over their own cups. Hynek had a familiar look in his eyes. Hawkins sat with his hand over his brow. "Oh boy," Griffin thought, sitting beside them. "Hynek's in love again." "Private Hynek has a bad sore throat," Hawkins told Griffin sadly. "Poor boy is in pain. Hey, Griffin, you are a medic. Take a look at the kid, will you?" Hynek just waved his hand. "Have you seen her, Drew?" "Who?" Griffin said cautiously. "The doc. Dr. Mirren. Boy, is she gorgeous." Hawkins and Griffin exchanged a look. "Gorgeous, huh?" Griffin said, and sipped at his coffee. He spat it back into the cup, and Hawkins grinned. "I could have told you that." He gestured at his own untouched cup. "This has got to be the worst coffee I've had since joining up." "I mean, she's got these great eyes," Hynek said, oblivious to coffee and conversation both. "So, what are you going to do about it?" Hawkins said. "As if I didn't know." "I don't know. My throat really hurts a lot, and I don't feel so good anywhere else either," Hynek said. Griffin wasn't surprised that the kid kept a straight face. Hynek had the ability to buy his own stories, lock, stock, and barrel. Hawkins sighed. "Maybe you'd better see the doc," he said. "Yeah," Hynek responded. "Yeah, that's a great idea." He jumped up and headed for the door. "Hey, soldier boy," Griffin called after him, grinning. "The Sarge isn't done with us yet, remember? You'd better check out the doc, I mean. Let the doc check you out later on." "Oh, right." Hynek trudged out of sight, laughing. Hawkins stood. Griffin thought of telling him about the conversation between Colonel Saunders and Dr. Marks, but for some reason didn't. Perhaps, he thought, because he himself didn't quite know what to make of it yet. Saunders had said, drag 12 billion people through what? The quantum gate? 12 billion people was roughly the population of Earth.